If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
All right, we are back with Elijah Thompson from Dank Pro-Life Memes for this discussion.
Hey.
And again, we have the awesome Rachel Crawford, also going to be an important part of this discussion.
I'm excited for this episode because we don't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah, this one's scary. I think it's going to be okay, but it's a complicated topic, and we haven't spent a lot of time kind of setting this up, but I think we're all kind of roughly on the same page. So let me just kind of set up what we're talking about here. We have talked a lot about before at ERI how it's important for both sides to be as clear as possible with our language. Sometimes we like to quote Tim, who say, clarity is our friend. It's important for both sides. And while I think the pro-life movement is, generally speaking, better about clear language than the pro-choice movement, we want to talk today about a case where I think the pro-life language can be confusing to the other side, and just kind of have a conversation about that. The confusion can also have a second negative impact of losing credibility with pro-choice people, and you're not going to change someone's mind if you've lost credibility with them. So the stakes here can be high. And the topic is, how should we define the word abortion, especially when talking about life-threatening pregnancies? Some pro-life people would say it only counts as an abortion if it's an elective procedure, one that a mother chooses because of socioeconomic reasons or pressure from her boyfriend or something like that. I think most pro-life people actually hold to that view, and certainly a lot of pro-life leaders, I know that's what they would say. Conversely, pro-choice people think of an abortion as any time a baby dies, including miscarriage sometimes, or at least any time a medical procedure is done that has the effect of ending the child's life. So some pro-choice people, to be fair, would rule out natural miscarriages, but they're not going to rule out things like the way that we would intervene with a tubal pregnancy. And so now you've got equivocation. You've got pro-life and pro-choice people sometimes using the same words, but meaning different things. Let me give two examples of this. And these were actually the two sources that Live Action had quoted when they were kind of digging their heels in on this topic. We'll talk about their Facebook situation in a minute, but they're kind of two sources on this. One, there's a public discourse piece. I will link to this in the description if you want to see for it yourself. But here's the headline. It is never necessary to intentionally kill a fetal human being to save a woman's life. In support of the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. It's a really long headline. That's in competition with us for long headlines, but that's the headline. But then when you read it, it's a statement from 5 doctors. And here's kind of the important quote out of it. If you read far enough down, it says, and I quote, "There are rare circumstances in which a mother's life is in jeopardy due to either pre-existing conditions or pregnancy complications. It is extremely rare for this to occur prior to the point of viability, currently 22 weeks after last menstrual period, 20 weeks after fertilization. After 20 weeks fertilization age, it is never necessary to intentionally kill the fetal human being in order to save a woman's life." So again, in the headline, it says it's never necessary to intentionally kill a fetal human being to save a woman's life. But then you get down into it and it says, after 20 weeks fertilization age, it's never necessary, which seems to kind of conflict with how a lot of people would read the headline. And also, I don't think, so where they say it's extremely rare for this to occur prior to the point of viability, ectopic pregnancies are 1 in 50. And I don't know if a lot of people would say that like 1 in 50 counts as extremely rare, but that's kind of one example of the way that pro-life people sometimes use this language. And then you've got the Dublin Declaration on Maternal Health Care, which has over 1,000 signatures on it. And it says, as experienced practitioners and researchers in obstetrics and gynecology, we affirm that direct abortion, the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, is not medically necessary to save the life of a woman. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatment results in the loss of her unborn child. We confirm that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women. So it is always fun when I have thoughts going around in my head And then I see someone else who's having the exact same thoughts going around in his or her head. Elijah, you reached out to me a while back about this issue with basically exactly the same things that I had been thinking about privately. Why don't you talk about the way that you've seen pro-life and pro-choice people talk about this? I know we started talking about this because of the live action Facebook fact check scandal. So why don't you talk a little bit about that too?
Sure. Yeah. I remember actually thinking I was going to record another episode of my podcast specifically on this. And then I reached out to you and I was like, hey, I wonder if Josh has thought about this. So I pretty much guarantee he has. I wonder if he's done anything on it, written anything on it, and thought about it. And so that's when we started talking about it. And at the time, it was when live action, there was it wasn't a very long clip, but Lila Rose was up on some kind of a stage. She said a bunch of stuff that was all good. And then she said, abortion is never medically necessary, or something very similar, very close to that. Mm-hmm. And underneath on Facebook, because I had that fact check thing, it was like a fact check and said from these doctors, and it had sometimes abortion is medically necessary. And I was like,
which Facebook had put on there. There was a Facebook fact check, right?
Right. And so I was like, okay, wait a second, hang on. There's something going on here, because either if we're all using words in the way that if we're all using words in the same way, then it either is sometimes medically necessary or it isn't medically necessary sometimes.
Right.
Like there's no way either one side is wrong or something is confused.
They can't both be right at the same time if they're both using the words the same way.
And it turns out people are using words in very different ways.
Yeah.
And so a couple of times I've kind of poked around in the pro-life community to figure out where people stand on this. And I think from my, casual market research, I guess what you want to call it, I've posted it at Dank Pro-Life Memes. I posted it in my ERI Pro-Life group. I posted on Twitter and on Instagram. And for the most part, this is how I phrased this particular poll. And I said, I'm doing some casual research, posted Dank Pro-Life Memes, but I figured I'd get some insight here too. This is at Are You Even Pro-Life? Mm-hmm. And it is pretty much representative of the way that I see everything else going on. And I said, when you use the word abortion, do you include intent? And my two options were, yes, intent is included. This means that medically necessary abortions do not exist and miscarriages are not abortions. The second option was, no, intent is not included. This means there are three categories of abortion, at least: elective abortion, medically necessary abortion, and spontaneous abortion. And for the most part, it seems as though it's like a split between, it's like 75% of people say that medically necessary abortions don't exist, miscarriages are not abortions. And then it's only about 25% of people who say that there are three categories of abortions, and those are elective, medically necessary, and spontaneous.
I'm actually surprised it's that high on B, given your pro-life audience, because I feel like I've in my experience, pro-lifers almost always are talking about this in that first way, and I'm this really bizarre outlier.
Yeah. And so I've noticed a slight shift, I think, but on Dank Pro-Life Memes, it's very rare that you see anybody who is particular, like they're being as nuanced as I would like to be. But this is in Are You Even Pro-Life? And so I think it was a good representative sample, because in there are people in there who are not always looking to argue. And we know we're all pro-life. We all want to come together. We kind of want to have a good understanding of it. So as long as people understand what's happening, they're open to kind of exploring it. And so when, in my experience, the people who, it's usually like a 75-25 split. And the way that Lila Rose was using it in her speech, that thing that was posted on Facebook, was the way that most people seem to be using it, which is to mean that medically necessary abortions do not exist. And if you were to call a miscarriage a spontaneous abortion, that would be not good. They don't want that to happen. And so for me, looking at it as somebody who recognizes that words are often used incorrectly, or not even necessarily incorrectly, but in different ways, which results in confusion, which is like the first thing you learn in how to have reasonable conversations with people, is to make sure you're using words in the same way. Then it was very clear to me what was going on. And that's when I reached out to you and I was like, we need to figure this out, or somebody needs to figure this out, because I'm fine with changing the way that I'm using the word, as long as other people are also using the word in the same way. All I care about is communication actually happening effectively. Now, I don't care. I'm not going to plant my foot on and say, this is how we are to define abortion. But I will admit that the first time that I came to this conversation and I heard Lila Rose saying that abortions are never medically necessary, I was like, hang on, because sometimes they are. But it turns out that that's just showing where I was when it comes to where I stood on the question of how you define abortion, which I think is super weird that we're so far into this debate, but even the term abortion is still up in the air. Like how we're defining it is still confused. So.
I want to say something before Rachel jumps in that I just thought I really want people to understand in this. Like, this is not an attack on any side. Like, if you're a pro-life person and you've been using the language the same way Lila Rose has, like, this is an attack on you. There was something I just really liked about the way that you said it, Eliza, where you said both are right. Both live action and Facebook is right at the same time, because they're just using the word differently. It's not that Facebook's right and live action's wrong. It's live action is using the word abortion to mean a certain thing. Facebook and their fact checkers, whoever those people are using the word abortion in a different way. And that's why they are ending up at a different conclusion. And what we just want to see is, if our goal at ERI is to get pro-life and pro-choice people having productive conversations with each other, equivocation is really bad. It's really important for us to be using the words the same way, and define what you mean. And so if you're going to be in the camp, if you kind of stay in the camp of, I'm going to keep on using the word abortion to mean only an elective thing, then you just need to make sure that you're clear that that's the way that you're using it, especially if the pro-choice person asks you about the case of, if a mother's life is at risk, which is going to come up in like every other conversation you have about this.
Yeah. And I want to jump in with a speculation because I was not in the PR meetings with live action. And so I don't know with certainty why they have dug their heels in this much. And I know that there's been a lot of attention given to the organization. I think that's a good thing. And I like that there's a lot of good conversations coming of it of indirectly about censorship on social media and Facebook fact checking and how is that working in an unbiased way and things like that. Yeah. I love all of that that's happening.
Agreed.
But in their messaging, where they've very strongly put money and time into abortions are never medically necessary, here's what I guess is the agenda. There is ambiguity and confusion when it comes to life of the mother cases, when it comes to health and life of the mother in the legality, when it comes to just the everyday person who's not really involved with the debate. They don't know the nuance. They don't understand the medical situations and all the little bits and pieces. And in their mind, they have this ambiguous idea that is a result of intentional marketing by the abortion industry and those politicians and all the people who are given interviews and all the information being thrown at them. There's been this seed that was planted that's we need abortion because women's lives could be at risk. And what if a pregnant woman needs an abortion for some weird medical case that I don't really know about, but something back there is driving my pro-choice view that has to do with saving women's lives. And I think that they're trying to clear that up and trying to uproot that seed without explaining all the nuance, explaining ectopic pregnancy to the average person, because the average person doesn't pay attention for that long. They see the headline and that's it.
Right.
And I think that they're trying to give a counter headline that's pro-life that is going to actually bring clarity. That is my point. It's ironically, I think they're trying to bring clarity, which I think is a great goal. Maybe I'm wrong and they're doing something else, but I think that they're trying to do a counter strike against the misleading marketing of the abortion industry. A political marketing, not marketing to women who seek abortions, but political marketing to voters and the public.
And I think you might be onto something there too, because if you just kind of poll the average person, they in their mind would be under the impression that when you use the word abortion, you're not talking about medically necessary things. You're not talking about miscarriages. You're talking about elective abortion. You're talking about taking the life of a human being in utero on purpose. And I think that's reflected in the polls and stuff that I've seen. It's reflected in the conversations that I've had. And so Yeah, I don't think there's anything mischievous, however you pronounce that word. I'm not sure there's anything, nefarious going on when people are talking about this. I think they were just using the common language in terms of how abortion is traditionally understood. And I don't think this is the type of setting where we would kind of debate, is abortion ever medically necessary? Well, it depends on what you mean by words. It's like, this is the kind of topic we would do that. But when it comes to like saying something, I think like saying something in the public that's being pushed out to the average person who isn't particularly interested in the nuanced discussion about how to properly define abortion, I think they went the right direction. Because if I was doing that and I was just talking about, if I wanted to get that particular message across, I might choose the same thing. I might try to sneak a nuance in there somewhere, but at the same time, maybe that's why I'm not the one doing it. So I think you might be onto something there.
So if I was trying to be as like effective as possible at persuading the everyday pro-choice person and uprooting that seed and pulling it out by the root, okay, I would do it in a way that would anger and alienate pro-life people because they're not my audience. But I don't think that would be a good move for live action. I think that would be a bad move for most pro-life groups, honestly. You would need to do it in a way that like no one can trace you because you're going to lose all your donors and all your friends. But like the statement I would make if I was trying to persuade the public with a soundbite and get rid of this concern forever. Anti-abortion advocates support medical intervention to save women's lives, even if the child dies. That is a true statement for the most part. I think that we all know that there are some people who are pro-life that don't support the medical intervention. They are the fringe, the 99%,
right?
Some sort of medical intervention. Notice how I'm not being nuanced about that. And I'm using the word child on purpose. I don't think it's a tricky maneuver. I think the anti-abortion is on purpose. Like all of the ways I'm wording this, that's how I would do it. I think it would be a mistake for live action to do that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. But like in a perfect world, what messaging would I use? I would use that messaging. Yeah. Now I have a tricky thing up my sleeve that I want to get to in a little bit, but I want to like maybe talk about this first.
Yeah. I like when I heard you say like, here's like the way that I would like to say it. Like, I'm like, I like that but again, I think I have different priorities. Like I'm trying to figure out how do we communicate to pro-choice people in a way that they're going to be able to hear us, that are going to understand us, and be more likely to be persuaded by us. And so given that that's my goal, I know Life of the Mother is going to come up. And if Life of the Mother comes up, I've started with a lot of common ground. Okay, no. We're probably basically on the same page here. If like, I'm going to kind of say like my first principle there is if we can save both, we should save both. That might not matter to you because you might not think that the unborn's a person. So like, it doesn't really matter. But look, because I do, I think we should try to save both. If we can't, then I think, and we have to use a medical procedure to actually save her life because her life is actually at risk, then I think that we should do that and we should do it in the least direct way possible. Like that's basically where I'm coming down on. And in a couple of sentences, I've explained my view in a way that like virtually every pro-choice person's like, oh, okay. And then we just move on. Like they don't want to have a debate about all the intricacies of what that means. They're just like, oh, well, you had a reasonable answer to that one. So now I'll ask you a different one. And then we move on and talk about personhood or whatever. And so I want to see pro-life people better able to do that. If, on the other hand, you're a pro-life person, the pro-choice person says, so what do you think about, do you think women should have to die because they've got these terrible pregnancies? And you're like, abortion is never necessary to save her life. Well, you're going to have to have a lot more of a debate now about what do all those words mean, because they're probably not going to be real likely to just buy what you just said, hook, line, and sinker, because you don't already have that credibility with them.
Yeah, I mean, my personal approach in individual conversations, sometimes I pull punches early on. And like when a topic comes up, I'll pull some punches so that I can bring them in later. Mm-hmm. When Life of the Mother comes up, I don't really pull any punches. I do a 1-2 strike. That's a psychological intent. Like I'm like psychologically very intentional.
What is your 1-2 strike?
My first strike is without any snark or any arrogance. I try to be as chill as possible. I just say, can you provide some clarity on like what kind of Life of the Mother cases you're concerned about? What ones most concern you? And they don't know what they're concerned about. And I want them to know that they don't know. I would say 98% of the time, they don't know what ectopic pregnancy is. They're not asking about ectopic pregnancies. They're asking about something that's behind a curtain. And so I want to show the guy behind the curtain. That's my experience on campus, talking to hundreds and hundreds of pro-choice people. If they're not like a passionate pro-choice advocate, they don't really know, or, you know, someone in their family has had an ectopic pregnancy. Otherwise, they really don't know what that is. So they're concerned about life of the mother. And I think that helps me be more persuasive when I give my response, because first, I want them to recognize that they don't know a life of the mother case. If they bring up ectopic pregnancy, that's fine. It's not going to hurt my second punch.
Right.
My second punch is the statement I'm giving that I think people should make publicly, which is the anti-abortion advocates support medical intervention to save the life of the mother, even if the child dies. And I reassure them, you're never going to pass a law where that's not true. And we don't need legal abortion for that to be a possibility, or, you know, you're never going to pass something that's not going to allow for medical necessity. It's not going to happen. And we don't want it to. And they're like, oh, that's a relief. Okay. And it's gone forever. We've cured them from that disease. And it's amazing.
That's so interesting, because it's like your approach here has been really different than mine. It's always fun when I find, you know, when we find those things out. But like, I think there's something really cool about what you're doing here, because what you've noticed, which is something that I wouldn't have guessed. I've been probably overly charitable. Like, I'm thinking that they understand this better than maybe they do in this kind of case. But like, maybe they've got like the cases that they've seen on like TV shows, like medical dramas, like ER or House or whatever. Like, basically every one of those shows has had at least one episode of a woman with a life-threatening pregnancy. Like that happens in these shows. But a lot of times they're showing things that like basically never happen. Like, to make it overly dramatic, they've got like, you know, they have to choose, is the mother going to live or is the baby going to live? And they've got this kind of like choice, you know, situation. There's this, you know, they're going to pull the lever on the train track, basically. And that's not almost ever an actual situation that's happening now. It's not usually we can, you know, save the baby, but not the mom. Like, usually the baby is not going to survive if the mom dies. And so it's an overly dramatic, but yeah, it's just interesting that you've kind of noticed, like, they've got things like that maybe in their head. They're not even thinking of tubal pregnancies, which is like the case that we're almost always talking about.
Yeah.
Usually when I'm having this conversation, I've been making the distinction between medically necessary, elective, and spontaneous abortions, like, since I started in the pro-life stuff. And so what I'll usually say is something along the lines of, I'll agree that some medically necessary abortions exist. I'll say yes, and that I would consider that to be morally justifiable, as long as we are treating both human beings like patients. And then I will continue. Usually, it's in like a comment section of some kind, and I'll say something like, an abortion, a medically necessary abortion does not justify homicide. So, like, what they're trying to do, usually, it's sort of like the rape case. Or what they will do is they'll point to a medically necessary abortion. And then if you say, yes, I'm good with medically necessary abortion, then they'll somehow try to make the link that say, because the word abortion is there, they'll make it the link over to being elective abortion, which of course they are two totally different moral pictures. So like one is you're going out of your way to save the life of a mother, and the accidental byproduct is the unborn child dies. Whereas what they're actually arguing for, they're not arguing that they want only medically necessary abortions to exist. They're arguing that they want elective abortions to exist. And so I try to kind of highlight that. Unfortunately, well, I guess maybe not unfortunately, most of the conversations that I have on that issue, when I do that, end up going into the, well, should the fetus be even considered to be a patient anyway, because it's not human, it's not a person, or something like that.
I've got a different speculation as far as why people want to use the definition of abortion that kind of takes out all of the these potential elective procedures. I don't know if this is true, but here's a guess. I think some people want to be able to say that they are 100% pro-life. And so like
even pro-life.
To do that, because I see that all the time. I am 100% pro-life, and so blah, 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 blah. And it's like, to do that, like, no exceptions. I am a no exceptions pro-lifer. I see people doing that too. That's a good call out. And so, but like, to do that, you kind of, I feel like, have to use this, well, abortion only counts as an elective thing. Because then you can say that. You can say, like, basically no exceptions at that point means you're opposed to abortion in the case of rape. And you're opposed to abortion if there's something like wrong with the baby, but it might have anencephaly or something like that. It might die after birth or something like that. But that's basically all you're saying. You're not saying anything about ectopic pregnancies in that case. I've gotten things from like, if I'm going to speak somewhere where it's like, you've got to sign on to this statement to make sure we're good with your position on abortion. And sometimes I'll have something like that. You know, you have to sign here. You're 100% pro-life in all cases, or you have no exceptions. And then I've always got to do this obnoxious thing of replying and be like, I don't know what this means to you. Right. And so here's exactly what I think. I'm trying to be as clear as I can. If you're good with that, then I think we're good. But I don't know if we're using the language the same way. So I don't get to be the guy. It's just like, I just get to kind of put, you know, as my Facebook profile picture, 100% pro-life, no exceptions, because I know that's going to mean different things to a lot of people. And like, I'm willing to just give up that. Okay, I don't get to say like that, you know, cool sounding thing that's going to rah-rah on my side. We already know I'm not super into rah-rah on my side anyway. I think the main thing that I want to say though on this, that's just, I think like an important point of clarity is I think there's actually something really confusing to pro-choice people about using the word abortion that way. Like kind of my thing, when people have asked me like, how do you think we had to define abortion? I've said something, I don't know if either of you would agree with this, but the way that I've kind of said in the past is like, I don't care so much what you call it. I care about us having real clarity on whether or not it's justified. Like whether you call a self-injectomy procedure, the procedure that almost all pro-lifers agree is totally fine in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, where we remove part or all of the fallopian tube. Catholic Church, it supports that procedure in that case. Obviously, it's a really tragic case. That's the one that like all of the pro-lifers basically agree on. And then the other two procedures, there's less agreement or common ground on. But it's like, whether you call self-injectomy an abortion or not, I don't care so much about the labels. I don't like the labels anyway. Okay. Like people are more complicated than the labels you give them. These procedures, this is complicated. I don't care what you call it. What I care is it justified or not? Is a self-injectomy morally justified? Is a self-androstomy morally justified? Is methotrexate morally justified? Like that's the stuff that matters to me, not so much what you label it. But here's the thing. When looking at the way pro-life people talk who are using that first definition, like the examples that I gave earlier, where it's like, you never, ever need an abortion to save a woman's life. The problem is, if to make this statement, abortion is never necessary to save a woman's life, if to make that statement, your definition of abortion is something like elective procedure to intentionally kill an embryo or fetus, then a statement that abortion is never necessary to save a mother's life is not a meaningful statement. It's like it's literally, it's circular. It's like saying that an elective procedure is never an inelective procedure, or an elective procedure is never necessary to save a mother's life. It's like, well, yeah, that's definitely true. But again, it's almost like, I don't want to say it's deceptive because I don't think it's intentionally deceptive, but it's like, practically speaking, for the pro-choice person, there is almost no way they're going to understand that's the way you're using that word unless you explain it. So, and that's natural. Naturally, they're not going to understand that that's how you're using that word. And so then it just gets really, really confusing. I just think we shouldn't be confusing. So either you got to be really clear about your definitions, or maybe it's okay to just say that I'm opposed to all elective abortions, and we can talk about, the procedures that might be necessary to save women's lives, and whatever we're calling those, that's this other category. And let's talk about those because they fall into a different moral category.
Anytime I am behind the scenes in like a secret pro-choice group or something like that I managed to get into, they almost always will share something like, look at this idiot, thinks that no abortions are medically necessary. And then underneath it, they like post, all these things, all these links to different articles and stuff like that. And then depending on the size of the group, they will just go bombard that Facebook post. And then it'll be like, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then I'm just sitting there like, as I'm watching it happen, which, you can't sit down and reason with 1,700 people all at once. And you're just watching it happen, and nobody's speaking the same language, and everybody's speaking past each other, and everybody's just getting like more angry, more frustrated with the other side that they're not even trying to understand. Yeah. And like this particular issue is one of the ones that like, even among pro-life people, like if you look at the Dank Pro-Life Memes thing, like even people in the comment section of a pro-life page are thinking that I am like attempting to justify abortion. I'm like, you guys, just relax for a second. Like, just go breathe some fresh air, have a snack, and then come back and we'll talk about it, because right now you're really on edge and you need to relax.
I think that brings up for me a bigger point, which is like what I was saying earlier about how a lot of pro-choice people, there's this thing in the back of their head about wanting to save women. And I think that the medical necessity point is a lot of like hot smoke and there's nothing behind it. What's bigger is they would disagree with a statement like, we don't need legal elective abortion to save women's lives. The reason that they're concerned about a statement like that, which I think a lot of pro-life people believe, is they strongly and adamantly are concerned about women taking their own lives through self-induced abortion. And that's way more significantly a problem for most people than some abstract life of the mother, like weird medical thing that we don't know exists or not. So I think that getting, putting our time and energy where it's going to make a bigger difference is strategically important. And I think that for a lot of pro-choice people, from my time spent with them, they would consider a woman desperate enough to self-induce an abortion to be a life of the mother case, which is hard for pro-life ears.
Yeah.
Because obviously we don't think about it in the same way. But I think digging our heels in and trying to definition our way through the argument is not going to be very persuasive. In the same way, if someone's trying to strong arm you into believing all of their gun right immigration policies by using the definition of pro-life to their advantage, it's not persuasive.
So I want to rephrase what I hear you saying, because I want to make sure that is clear to everyone. And if I'm missing it, then other people might be missing it too. Here's what I hear you saying, Rachel, is that a lot of times pro-choice people have this unstated premise, this hidden premise going on when they say this thing. Like, it is natural for pro-life people when we hear someone bring up life of the mother, we're thinking about tubal pregnancies, because it's by far the most common situation where a woman's life is actually at risk and we can't save both, at least not right now. And so we talk about that, but that might not be what they're talking about. They might not even think about ectopic pregnancy, with the point that you made earlier. Like, that's why I'm asking them, what are they talking about? And a lot of times they don't even bring that one up. They might be thinking about back alley abortions when they bring that up. And so then if you say, well, abortion isn't necessary to save women's lives, you are way talking past each other.
Yes.
And then you're just super unpersuasive to them, because they're just like, well, of course we do, or else women are going to die. They did before Roe.
Yes. And just to make my point even more clear, I have seen social media where there's a meme or a post or something relevant to abortion saves lives or abortion is pro-life. And when people are making statements like that, if you're in your pro-life mind, you're going to see abortion saves lives. No, it's never medically necessary. And they're not talking about that. They're not talking about ectopic pregnancy. They are talking about back alley abortion. And I could see that being an easy to make mistake.
So given that, then it might be really helpful for the pro-life person, if you're in this back and forth conversation, to try to draw out that hidden premise and ask, I wonder if maybe something that's in your mind as we're talking about this, and I might be wrong, and clarify if I'm wrong, but I wonder if maybe one of the situations that you're concerned about are, what if abortion became illegal and then women were having more dangerous abortions, like self-induced abortions? Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about? Or are you talking about tubal pregnancies and kind of offering them kind of these choices and let them kind of say what they actually mean? But again, we say this all the time. Sometimes they don't know what they mean. And you, as a pro-life person who probably has thought about this more than they have, or especially if you've taken something like our course, you've definitely thought about them. In almost every case, you've thought about this more than they have. You can help them to make their argument more clear, maybe even to help them make their argument a better argument, and then respond to it persuasively, which is going to be far more effective than just kind of hoping that you guys are all using language the same way.
Yeah.
I've actually had people on Twitter tell me that all abortions are medically necessary. And that's because a woman wants them. And therefore it is medically necessary for her. So this specific guy was subjectivizing the term medically necessary, because if a woman does not want to be pregnant, then an abortion is necessary for her. So that's why I think it's so important, like just make sure you understand what the heck the person's even talking about when they say it. Because when he was talking about, I think it was brought up when I said something like, well, a medically necessary abortion would not justify an elective abortion. That's when he was like, well, all abortions are medically necessary. So on his view, like 100% of abortions should be made legal, or kept legal, because they're all medically necessary. So he was saying the exact opposite of the Lila Rose, or the person who would say something that medically abortions are never medically necessary. So it's all over the map.
Yeah,
and that's one of the things I really intentionally broke down in my healthcare article, because luckily we have a definition of medical and of healthcare, right? And so healthcare has to be preventative, or it has to be restorative. And abortion is neither. If you're arguing it's preventative, it's one thing. If you're arguing it's restorative, it's another. And I go through that whole thing in my article, but you can push back strongly against that. And if you are starting to make arguments that things are medical or healthcare because someone desires the procedure, that's a very slippery slope, and it's very dangerous. And so I the medical community has clearly drawn agreed upon lines there. And that's how I push back with that. But you're absolutely right. Like, there's a lot of equivocation going on.
If you haven't read Rachel's article, Abortion is Healthcare, a Misogynistic Non-Argument, I will link to it in the description. It's a really good one. I'd highly encourage you to read, because again, the word healthcare can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It's helpful to find out what objectively those words mean and how to respond to those things. All right, I need to wrap this up. Final thoughts, Elijah, and then Rachel, before I wrap up the episode.
Final thoughts from me. I think it's kind of the same thing I've been saying for the last little while, is that it's one of the most important things you can do to actually have reasonable discussions on this, is to actually understand what the other person is saying, and to not have just a definitional debate. Well, yes, words do have meanings. Sometimes the person in front of you doesn't particularly care what you say the meaning is, or what Webster says the meaning is. He's using it in this particular way. And as long as you're using it in the same way, then communication is happening. And then if you can have the conversation that way, then sweet. I can call it whatever you want to call it, as long as we both know what I mean when we both use that word.
Well said. Rachel?
I would say, if you want to try to use pro-life rhetoric to describe the truth in a clearer way, the way I would suggest doing it is start being specific. Say elective abortion. And either say medical intervention, a medical intervention procedure, or you could even say a medical intervention abortion. I think the last one would be hard for pro-life people to swallow, but you're being really specific, and you're using the way that abortion is defined, in the dictionary and medical journals accurately. I think just saying elective abortion would really take you a long way.
Well said, both of you. And I just kind of want to just reiterate something I said at the top. There's no feelings here among the three of us of like superiority over pro-life people who have used the word abortion this way. Like, I don't think any of those people knew that it could cause this kind of confusion. I feel very, very I feel very charitable towards those people. This is complicated stuff, and is not obvious unless unless you're Elijah, who's like secretly hanging out in pro-choice Facebook groups of 18,000 and finding out what they say. Like, it might not be obvious if you're just listening to your own side that this confusion could be happening. This is one of the more subtle areas of confusion, I think, between pro-life and pro-choice people. And there are a lot of those areas. And so if nothing else, just remember, ask more clarification questions. You can almost not ask enough clarification questions to try to really understand where this person's coming from. And again, rephrase what you hear them saying before you try to counter it. Because if you've done it in a way that they're like, yes, that's exactly what I think, then you've got that clarity. And then anything that you say after that is going to be so much more persuasive. Elijah Thompson, thank you so much for hanging out with us the last couple of episodes. You can follow his work at Dank Pro-Life Memes on Facebook and get a different side of of pro-life advocacy than what you're going to get from Equal Rights Institute, but there's some good stuff there too. So thanks so much for being on with us, and
My pleasure.
We'll hopefully catch you guys on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.